So if somebody asked you today, who's winning the 2025 Premiership, the teams you might say is, Brisbane going back to back, you might say Sydney finally gets over the hump with a new coach. You might say Hawthorn, they added a couple of really, really good defenders. They're going to get a year older. They're going to get more experience. They're going to get a full season out of players like Will Day. You might go to them, or you might go to Geelong, who a lot of people were saying, including myself, that they're a really, really old team and that they're slow, but they've got some of the most exciting players in the competition. They've got players like Max Holmes running off half back. They've got a really, really strong forward line, and obviously what their defense is. They add Bailey Smith, so they're going to be really strong. But a team that I don't really think gets mentioned enough is actually Collingwood. So the Pies obviously they've just won the 2023 Premiership, and they took a massive step back in 2024. The Pies finished outside the top 8, and they went from a team that won 18 out of 23 games. They swept the finals and won the flag in 2023 to go to a team, looking from the outside in. It just doesn't really sort of make sense, So really, I wanted to talk about why I think they can bounce back in 2025. Because of the additions, to their team, and the fact that a lot of players on their team had really poor seasons for their standards. Like, you can go ahead and you can look at someone like Darcy Moore, who was across the board got worse. He was down 3 disposals per game. He was down 2 marks per game. And he was just really, really fumbly with the ball, missing kicks all the time. And as your captain, that's not something you want. There was even talks of him getting dropped, which is just crazy to say, for a team's captain, and especially because of how poised and how dominant he was in the 2023 season as he got his first All-Australian blazer. So you had a lot of players who really had down seasons. You had a player like Jordan De Goey, who missed a lot of time last year. He averaged pretty much the same goals, but he was down 3 disposals. I'm just looking at the stats here. He's down 2 clearances, and it was more the eye test than anything. Obviously, he went down in disposals and stuff, but just the eye test watching him, he wasn't as fast, wasn't as explosive, and that was just the case for a lot of players last year. The Pies also had a lot of forwards that missed a lot of time last season, including Brodie Myercheck and Dan McStay, who were arguably their 2 most impactful forwards. They were really heavily relying on the likes of Bobby Hill and Lachie Schultz and Jamie Elliott to provide the scoring power that they needed. And if you compare their scoring numbers last year in terms of goals to other teams in the competition, you'll find that Bobby Hill was the highest scoring player for Collingwood, or highest goal kicking player for Collingwood. He kicked 30 goals. A team like Sydney had 2 midfielders, obviously Chad Warner and Isaac Heaney, who both skyrocketed past that number. You had the likes of Nick Dacos being your 4th highest goal scorer for a season, which really, really should be warning signs, There was just a lot of injuries. Every player was missing time. They were getting called old. You've got players like Mason Cox. You've got players like Tom Mitchell, who were just really not able to provide anything for the team. So there was just really a lot of issues with the team. And not only that, but other teams figured out the blueprint. We live in a copycat league, and everyone tries to copy the best team and do what they do and do it better. So you could see the same sort of thing happen to a team like Sydney, who started last year 13-1 before Fremantle found them out, and it was just a downhill thing from there. Obviously, leading up to the Port Adelaide game where they lost by 112 points. But Sydney managed to get it together. They made the grand final and then blew it there. But that thing happens all the time where teams figure them out, which is why it's so amazing when a team like Richmond can win 3 and 4 years, or a team like Hawthorn in 13, 14, 15 can three-peat, because it's just so incredibly rare for something like that to happen. But Collingwood now have a really good chance to, the pressure's off them, the spotlight's off them. They're no longer the team that's getting chased, and they can really, really start to build a strong 2025 campaign, I think. And the majority of the reason why I think this is the case is because they've pretty much now, they're pretty much fully healthy, and they've got their whole 2023 team back outside of, players that weren't really good enough, and the players they did add or have added now are just better than the players in the 2023 campaign. So I can really, really see this team finding some form and being one of the best teams in the competition, if not the best team in the competition again. And one thing that, is a really big misconception with the Pies is that, their team's really old, which, of course, they are the oldest team in the competition. So, it's obvious that that statement, does get made. But however, I had a look at their list, and in terms of their physical prime, I would say that 19 out of their 23 players are in their physical prime. And I'm just looking at this little list I've got here now. Other than Sidebottom, Pendlebury, Jeremy Howe, and Jamie Elliott, every other player on the team is in their physical prime, which is just crazy to say when you think, this team's old. And obviously, I'm excluding players like Tom Mitchell, who I don't think will be in the best 22, as well as someone like Mason Cox, who I don't see being in their best 22 either. And not only that, but I think that the additions that they had are going to really allow them to improve their ball movement and get their ball movement back to how it was before. So the players I'm obviously talking about are Dan Houston and Harry Perryman. Houston is one of the best kicks in the competition, and the way that he can find players off half back and, explore through the middle and take on risky kicks, it's some of the best in the competition. And Harry Perryman will be probably playing on a wing, and what he'll be able to do for this team is really something that I don't think many people have really noticed or really thought about. Obviously, everyone's been talking about Houston as the main one, but Perryman is a player that can really, really help this team in a big way. And not only that, they also add Tim Membry, which drastically helps and improves their forward line, which has struggled in the past couple of seasons. So Membry's kicked 40 goals multiple times in his career, and although he is getting a little bit up there in age, I think he's turning 30 this year, or maybe 31, but having that scoring power and those options in the forward line, the flexibility that they've got now is great, because they're going to have McStay returning, they're going to have Brody Myercheck, and now they're going to add Tim Membry. So that's a three-headed monster of key forwards that can really dominate. And last year, obviously, as I've said, their top three goal kickers were Bobby Hill, Lockie Schultz, and Jamie Elliott. So you know that they've got the scoring power there in the small forwards, and it's just the key forwards need to shine. So having three guys, it's kind of a similar thing to what Sydney's got right now, with obviously Logan, Amadi, and McLean. And if you can get 5 or 6 goals out of those guys every week, out of those three, one guy just gets 3 goals one game, one guy gets 4 one game, and you get a lot more scoring power, and you're not relying as heavily on Nick Dacos to hit the scoreboard, and Lipinski to hit the scoreboard, and Jack Crisp to hit the scoreboard. So having that's really going to improve their team. They also added players, well, not added players, but they're going to have, options like Billy Frampton. They're going to have options like Mason Cox and Reef McGuinness, who can, fill in, who won't be in the best 22, but can provide a lot of help for that forward line and a lot of flexibility, and allow them to try different lineups, And their defense, they've only really got one key defender right now in terms of that could take Tom Hawkins in his prime or something like that. I can't really think of, or Jesse Hogan. Could take a Jesse Hogan right now. So they're going to need to trial some new players there. And they've got Charlie Dean, they've got some other guys there, but having Billy Frampton as an option, maybe even trying Dan McStay, who has played in defence before, trying him in the back line could be something that they want to try and explore. But their defence is already really good. We know that. They've got Maynard, they've got Quaynor, they've got players off half back, obviously. They've got Darcy Moore, who should be returning to form. So this team could be really powerful next season. And I've gone this far without really talking about Nick Dacos, who at the time when they won the flag was their best player in his second season, and he was just 19 years old during that game, and he dominated, and he had a broken leg in that game as well, I think, or he was not had a broken leg, but he was just recovering from it. He comes in and he just dominates in the whole season and in the grand final especially. So having Nick Dacos in his 4th season is going to be a force to be reckoned with, and I think he's almost untaggable now. Like, he's experienced a tag for the last couple seasons, he's experienced the McGuinness tag, he's experienced a bunch of other players who have tagged him, and I think now he's just kind of, got into that Bontempelli mold where you just can't tag him. Like, you can try, but you're just not going to be able to tag Nick Dacos. And having that with a lot of good players surrounding him now, with De Goey, who should return to form, with Crisp, and then obviously you have Sidebottom and Pendlebury, who Pendlebury just doesn't seem like he ever gets worse. He obviously has gotten worse over the journey, but he can still provide a lot for this team. And then you haven't even mentioned Josh Dacos, who is an all-Australian wingman, probably a top 3 wingman in the comp with Errol and probably Massimo. And having him is just another player that's really going to help your team. And we already know their experience with close games and how good they are in that. And I feel like this team is really going to be able to dominate. And I would say that them, along with probably Brisbane and Hawthorn, are the three teams that I'm really most excited in and think will really dominate next season. Obviously, Brisbane not too sure about, only with one key forward now with Hipwood, but yeah. And just another thing that I wanted to add before I get out of here is that they have 17 games in Melbourne, which they do most years, but Collingwood 17 games at Melbourne, that's 17 home games, and obviously they travel really well, their fans travel really well, but the Pies are going to have home games, fans behind them, and it's just going to be a great atmosphere, I reckon, for the Pies this year. And I can really see them going all the way. Like, if I was to pick which team I think would win the flag right now, like, Collingwood would be right up there. It'd probably be them or Hawthorn. But I'm really excited to watch pretty much every team this season. But Collingwood, man, Collingwood is scary.